I am thrilled to now give you some context and introduce our next speaker. I've known Steve for a while. He is a graduate of the Partners in Policymaking class, which was mentioned a little bit ago. And Steve has participated in numerous public policy campaigns and even put himself out on the line running for public office and won after realizing his role and responsibility as an advocate in the disability community, and was elected to his local school board not too long ago. Despite his daughter's unexpected passing in 2014, Steve remains steadfast in his determination to make the world a better place for people with IBD. And just a quick mention of how we got to this presentation. Steve has an incredible presentation and a story about his process as a parent through grieving, and it's an incredible story. When we were talking about it, getting ready for this, and considering our theme of intersections, he was mentioning a lot about the church's involvement in that grieving process, but also in his daughter's life. And so I stretched Steve, and I challenged him, and I thought this might be pretty cool, considering we're talking about intersections, to make sure that we're also talking about something that does not get talked about a lot, about the intersection of church and disability. So we're going to, I'm handing it over to Steve, who will weave both of those themes into his presentation. So will you please welcome Steve Wheeler.
Thank you very much. I'm particularly excited to be here and grateful that Jordan introduced me, because we do go way back, 2007, which is a long time, you know. I recognize some faces in here, and certainly glad to meet more. So, yeah, our journey, he already beat me to the punchline, but that's okay. I think it's important for you to understand a little bit about my background to fully appreciate why I can talk about all the different things that go with this journey. And it does come from, our daughter was born with disability, cerebral palsy. That's kind of the definition of the disability. And that would have been just about 21 years ago. She would be having her 21st birthday here at the end of this month. And it was a complete surprise, as cerebral palsy often is. And we had to learn a lot very, very quickly, because there was absolutely no way to know that was going to happen. It changed everything in our lives. And the reason I'm standing before you today is because of Cassie. So my love for her continues, and her influence on my life continues on a daily basis. There's no time that I'm not being influenced by the community that she introduced me to, is represented by this room here. So I want to thank you for what you do to support and participate in these types of events, because it makes a difference. And I know this from seeing it, and I'm more educated and armed with information now because of things like this that you wouldn't necessarily think you need to be when you're first becoming a parent. An interesting story on that, a little segue. Just this week, we, dear friends of ours, their eldest daughter was one of Cassie's caregivers for a little while there. And she's come of that age where she had her first baby. And we were invited to be in the hospital, in the waiting room, to be part of that glorious event. And it was a glorious event. It was the first time since our son was born, who is typically developing. It was the first time I've been in a hospital that it was something positive. Since Cassie was born, everything from her time there and all the repeated life flights and everything else that made her journey very difficult initially. And then my parents and my wife's parents, and even I have been in the hospital more times than I care to recall. None of that's ever any much fun. But a birth that goes well, that's cool. So, I'm not a grandparent yet, but I feel a little bit like one. It's kind of cool. All right, so more of the background. I was in a whole different place, a whole different world when I started this. I actually worked in the high-tech industry, and when Cassie was born, everything changed. And she brought me to my knees that morning, and I knew where my faith was. I had always been questioning it until that time. But it was that morning, and that's part of my testimony, which I'll give it in a different venue if you'd like. But it is part of what my start in understanding what churches could do to help, or not do, as the case may be. And Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. Anybody heard of him? Let's see some hands. I want to see some hands because I want some participation today. Everybody put up their hand just because. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. 7 Habits. Okay, he talks about having your ladder leaning against the wrong wall. And that truly was the case for me. I had used to climb ladders as a firefighter. Then I was climbing the corporate ladder. And when Cassie was born and all that went with that, I found that my ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. So today, what I do is I climb ladders to make people's homes safe and accessible. So I'm a general contractor, and for the sole purpose of making homes safe and accessible, installing the equipment that transfers people from one place to another, doing roll-in showers, that type of thing. And it's always done with the love that I have for Cassie. Where churches come into this is that we try to go to church and feed our newfound faith. And it was really difficult. It was really hard. It was actually a pain. Has anybody had a difficult time going to church? I mean, it's like going to some businesses it's very difficult to go to also. And the Americans with Disability Act is in place to make public access available and business access available. But what I learned in preparing for today is that the Americans with Disability Act does not cover religious organizations. Can you believe that? That blew my mind. And yet, we live in a progressive state. If you have a disability, there's really no better state to be in than California, right? And there are so many things and services that exist, starting back with the Land Act to what we've got going on now, that if you've got a disability, this is the place to be. So I am happy to report that California has its own building code, the CDC. Now, you'd think a general contractor would know that. Well, I was aware of it, sure. But I don't do commercial work. I just do residential stuff. So I don't get involved with the ADA very often because there are some sue-happy lawyers out there that will go in and nitpick a quarter inch off on a door opening, which is important. Don't mean to diminish how important that will be for some people. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to, personally, that's not what I want to deal with. But I do want access to the places that want us there. So the question was, when I discovered that the ADA didn't cover religious organizations, why? Why in the heck not? Why not make themselves available? And this is true for any religion, okay? It's not just one versus another. But why wouldn't a religion want to embrace the very people that are going to benefit from that? Whether you have a disability or you're trying to deal with, as a parent or whatever, your loved one, there's a lot that can come from the nurturing of a church family that you'd think they'd want to embrace them. Well, when I was starting my faith path, a lot of things were thrown at me, and a lot of other people threw their beliefs at me that just didn't sit well. And to this day, I mean, it will be a chapter in my book of some of the atrocious things that were said about different types of sin that would have led to that. I mean, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these types of things because I couldn't have been the only one to ever experience this. I know I'm not. But it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking to hear this when I'm just trying to cope with when's the next life flight. And that led to that was pretty difficult to deal with. So I'm kind of jumping around with a few different things here because it all does plug together. And we were taught, we went to a lot of training on how to advocate because the school district was not ideal in embracing the idea of inclusion or anything specific about Cassie's needs. Everything was a fight. They wanted to put her in a special day class in a corner of a room and not do anything with her all day long. She was medically fragile, had a lot of issues, had to constantly keep track of suctioning her and that type of thing. But you know what? At 2 years old or so, she started not needing those lifelines all the time. And she started getting stronger and healthier, and it was crazy. It was actually really, really weird. Because at one point in there, the fear of her passing transitioned to the fear of her living. Can you believe that? We actually started to fear, as her parents, that, oh my gosh, Cassie's going to outlive us. Now what? What are we going to do? How are we going to ensure that her care is going to be as vigilant as we are of making sure she's safe and protected? She couldn't advocate for herself very effectively. Completely dependent on us for everything. Smart little girl tracking the body. Didn't work very well. And one of the things that we learned in advocacy training was when you go to an IEP meeting and your kid can't be there, bring a picture. So I want to introduce you. I don't use PCs, so I hope I get this right. Hey, this is Cassie. And she's a beautiful little girl. Loved her and love her immensely. She did pass unexpectedly in June of 2014, and it was brutal. It's still brutal, but because we changed the conversation from the grieving to churches. I want to get segued into that pretty quickly here. But I want you also to know that I'm an open book. I am very open about this entire journey, and that's one of the things that I think that I've been given the gift of being able to speak from the heart and address anything. So if you have a question, if you're willing to hear the truthful answer, I will give it to you. So know that at some point here, we'll open things up for questions. When we went through, I just love looking at these pictures, aren't they great? Really proud of her. And like I said, she influences my life every day. I wouldn't be standing up here if not for her. So the church situation, how does a conference about policy talk about churches? How do we get to this point? Well, it was because of Jordan. It's all his fault. But it is a big part. It's a big consideration when there are resources that are available. And for me, it came up when I was elected as a school board member back in 2010, 8, somewhere in there. And I served long enough to, then we had some more family stuff. I regrettably had to resign after a year to allow somebody else to work full time because there were too many family issues going on with Cassie and my dad and other things. So I served for a while, long enough to get to rub elbows with some other elected officials, and it was really a good experience. And in doing that, I brought up some of the challenges and the plights that we had in advocating and trying to survive, frankly, because in our experience with church, I knew what they could and couldn't do. And there were a lot of voids there in what they couldn't do or what they wouldn't do. And we'll get on that in a moment. But I talked to an elected official. He was a senator. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. About the issue, about not getting the support we needed, the financial challenges of doing all of these things on your own, wanting more help from the government. And he's like, no, you're not going to get it. go to your church, go to your faith-based organization. And I was really put off by that because I already knew that that was not an avenue. And I felt like it was a cop-out on his part to do that because he pretty much dismissed all the heartfelt sentiment that I had just shared about this journey and what needed so that in the effort of advocacy, just completely dismissed and thrown on an organization or a group that not everybody goes to. Not everybody participates in church. Not everybody can participate in church. And that was the challenge that we had. Cassie, with her complex needs, really needed an attendant right there serving her and suctioning her at a moment's notice. But she was typically developing up here. So like any other kid, she got bored sitting in the lesson. And she would vocalize at inappropriate times. And, you know, what are you going to do? So we tried things like, oh, you should take her to the cry room. Well, not when she's 8 years old. That's totally inappropriate. And it really was a slap in the face. That's how I took it. And I didn't have enough skills under my belt at that point to know how to advocate for what I thought should be pretty basic. We kept trying to go, and every time something would happen, and we ended up out in the lobby. And there was no setup in the lobby for listening to the sermon and no speakers or anything. So we're out there kind of on our own, feeling very detached from what would have otherwise been a family environment. So we stopped going, which is really sad because when you, in part of studying for today and going in an area that I didn't know as much about now as I do now, of the 20% of, it was referenced earlier, of the 20% of the population that have disabilities, only 20% of them are able to make it to church. And all the same reasons that we had for not going, I saw echoed into why people don't go. Because it's too hard, because it's unavailable. And when I learned that the ADA doesn't cover churches, I thought, that sucks. Because one more barrier that people can hide behind as to why they don't allow somebody to come in or why they don't go. Because they go, oh, well, it's not accessible, so I'm not going to go. Well, grassroots advocacy, make it a point of letting your needs be known. When we saw that the ADA does that, I got excited when I found that California has its building code, as I mentioned earlier, that overrides the ADA, and it, in this case, replaces it so that any new construction will be CBC compliant, so the California Building Code compliant, which just happens to be ADA. So any new religious building will be made with that. So any place that has an assembly, that's where you're going to have access. For existing buildings, however, like the church we go to now, it's a tiny little itty-bitty church. It's in a historic building up in Grass Valley, and which is about 80 miles east of here on 49. And that building is so old that to do one thing to upgrade it, and this is how the building code works, if you pull a permit to do one thing, you end up having to touch a bunch of other things when you do commercial work, or in this case, working on a church. So 20% of your budgeted income for remodeling has to be spent on upgrading for access. And then they were kind enough to identify what are those top 5 things that need to be done. An accessible route, ingress and egress, as it's called, needs to be identified. But 20% of $140,000, which is about the break point, that's a lot of money. And a lot of churches don't have it. I can tell you that the little church I go to doesn't have that kind of money. It's still fairly accessible, though, and if any of you want to go there, I will make sure that you get in. That being said, that's fun. blank. That never happens to you guys, right? Right? Jeez. It was doing so well, too. The CVC will kick in and make things accessible, but on the remodel situation, you are limited. The other thing I saw a lot of echoing of when I did my research is that for the states other than California, they don't have their own building code that overrides the ADA. So people like me, really like it here, they can hide behind that. We can exclude. And the general sentiment out there is, well, do the right thing. Bring people in, because depending on the faith, there's a lot about bringing people in who have disability. There are some faiths that are very, very specific about having ministered to people with disability. There are some other faiths that don't. And I learned more about that in this exercise too. I was surprised. I knew about some of it, but I didn't know all of it. What's my time? 10 minutes. Great. Awesome. So, the effect of having the different types of access for a church is important. What you want to be able to do is, if you want to go, is find what places are accessible. And that could be from sign language to audio, different types of things that meet your needs. And that's how we would handle it right now. If somebody came into through our doors and needed access, we would figure out what it is. But I never wanted Cassie relegated to the very back row. So if somebody came into the church and wanted, it's like, where would you like to sit? Basic respect right there. Give people an opportunity to sit where they want. Because they might hear or participate better being up front than they can if they're all the way in the back. Nobody should be shunned in this journey. So there are some resources I wanted to share with you. Turns out the one that I'm most familiar with, Johnny and Friends, is something that is in, I might brutalize the name, even though I'm a native Californian, Agora Hills down in Southern California. Is where the main headquarters is, but they have actually 20 different locations or chapters throughout California, and I'm familiar with the one here in Sacramento. They are Christian-based, and there are, if you look for disability ministry in your search engine, most of the ones that come up are going to be Christian, I found. Kind of striking, so I'm like, why is that? I don't know the answer to that. But what I did find was if you do disability ministry and then a particular faith, then you will start seeing some that might be specific to your own faith. I looked up disability ministry Jewish, found some stuff. Catholic, found some stuff. And didn't find some stuff in other areas, but it's there. So there are some resources, and then coincidentally, one of the gentlemen that I've known for years and years and years, even longer than Jordan, he had worked with Johnny and Friends here in Sacramento for 20 years. He just left and started his own consulting business in helping churches become accessible in the ministry aspect. So helping run the programs that serve this community. And they've done some phenomenal things up in the Granite Bay area. There's a mega church there that has a lot of resources available to it. They've done amazing things in their outreach and support, primarily because of Dan's efforts. So I checked with him and asked permission to share his contact information should you want it. It's up on the screen now. That he's another great resource who's very familiar with the process. He himself has disability, a couple of them. He was in pretty severe car accident, and his story is pretty amazing, actually. But Dan's a great guy, and has been instrumental for me in many arenas in my life to figure things out. Those are the highlights of what I've discovered in the last, since we last chatted, which was only about a week ago, it seems. And there's a lot of information that really helps explain more about the journey on getting access to churches. My bottom line is, I know that disability doesn't seem to be discriminatory at all. It at any given time. And what's discriminatory, unfortunately, are people. So policies, that's why we're here, is what can we change about policies? I'm glad to say that it sure seems that we don't have to beat anybody up about the ADA. We don't have to beat up anybody about the California Building Code, because we got that. And the last change that I'd like to see is builders start doing universal design from the onset, so that all homes are at the very least visitable. That's the term I like to use. So that it takes less resource to convert a home and make it accessible. If you were to take away on how you could carry a banner or a torch, that'd be the next big one for me. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to open it up to any questions you might have.
Any questions for Steve?
Have you changed the way that people think about inclusion in that? Have you changed the way that people in your area feel about including someone with a disability in a church service? Or
Well,
do you get that type of advocacy?
That's a great question. I would absolutely be able to do that now by being who I am and what I've been groomed to do through partners of policy making and so forth. But there was a bit of a hiatus there while we were caring for Cassie and not able to go. So it didn't affect a lot of change in any of the churches that we had been attending with her. I know that change is affected in this area, in the Sacramento area, because of Johnny and Friends and the people that I'm connected with. So yes, I've seen change, but I have yet to take credit for it.
That's fair.
All right, Steve, thank you so much for sharing.
You're very welcome.